Hi guys, so in this video we'll be discussing three different things. First of all, we'll discuss what is economics and we'll be answering that from one aspect. The other thing is the concept of ceteris paribus, which is another economic concept. And then the third thing is to differentiate between micro and macroeconomics, which is really helpful when we're covering the whole syllabus. So let's start off with what is economics. So by definition, economics is a social science. They are natural sciences. Natural sciences includes obviously physics, chemistry, biology. These are your natural sciences. At the same time, you also have social sciences, and this branch of science, which is social science, includes economics, psychology, sociology, and subjects like that. So, as per se, there is no one definition of economics. There are different definitions, which obviously incorporate different aspects of economics. For example, there is one about wealth, how economics is more about wealth. There is one about how economics is regarding studying how people react or how people engage with other people. So that's one thing. But the definition which we'll be focusing on right now is a bit different. So, according to our definition, it is a social science that studies the relationship between scarce resources. So, the key word is scarce, which basically means in limited supply. So, as we know, all resources are scarce. So, it's the science which studies the relationship between scarce resources and the allocation of those scarce resources between alternate users. So, these scarce resources can be used in different uses. Let's say there is one use A, there is another use B. So we have these scarce resources and we have different competing users, right? These are alternating users. So we can either choose A or we could choose B. So if we choose, let's say A, we cannot choose rather B. It's not about choice, it's more about being constrained. So we don't really have this choice of choosing B if we choose A, or if we choose B, we don't have the choice of choosing A. So we can only choose one of them in this simple example. So that's what we study, like how we have different choices, and within those choices we choose a certain choice, and because of that we have to leave something else out. So that's the definition of economics. Now the second part is ceteris paribus. I'm just going to write CB, ceteris paribus. So ceteris paribus is basically a statement which says that all other factors constant. It's a phrase basically. It's not in English, it's some other language, but I think it's Latin or Greek. I'm not really sure about this one. But this really means what this really means is that we hold all other factors constant. All other, and my pen isn't working, factors constant. So the reason why this thing is relevant to us is because we assume that when we hold all the factors constant, for example, let's say if we were to talk about the law of demand, right? So in that case, we have a lot of factors affecting demand at the same time. But when we draw the demand curve, basically whenever we draw the demand curve, something like this, so what we do is that we assume all other factors are constant. So the only factor in this case which can affect our demand is price, because price is on the y-axis and this is the quantity demanded. And so what we assume is that the only factor which really is a variable in this case is the price, and all other factors are constant. And the reason why we do this is because obviously we cannot take into account all factors at the same time, because some factors are immeasurable, some factors are not even quantifiable, and so you can't really take into account every single thing. For example, let's say if we were to talk about consumer confidence, right? And so consumer confidence leads to higher demand overall, and in that case we can't really measure consumer confidence. I can't really assign a value to that, right? And at the same time, when I cannot really calculate the value, I can't take it into account at that point, and At the same time, there are thousands of other variables affecting a consumer's demand. If I was to do that, it would be costly. It would obviously take a lot of time, and so it would be irrational to do that thing. And so rather than take into account all the factors, I just take into account the factors which are relevant to me. And in this case, what we can use to make sense out of this is when we focus on small things, or when we focus on a bit, we are able to see the bigger picture. And for this, we can even take the example of the law of demand. So in this case, if we were to not keep all other factors constant, it would be impossible to come up with a certain diagram, and then all calculations or all theories which are based on this diagram would be flawed, and that would obviously be a huge problem in economics. And so that's why we look at small details, or we capture those small details and keep everything else constant in order to see the bigger picture and make sense out of everything. So the next thing which we'll be focusing on right now is micro and macroeconomics. So microeconomics and macroeconomics are branches of economics as a whole. So economics is divided up. It's a social science, so that's a branch of science. And then economics itself is divided up into micro and macro. So MA and MI. And then obviously macro is divided up into different chapters, micro is divided up into different concepts and chapters as well. So let's start off with microeconomics. So microeconomics is basically a branch of economics which deals with individual units. So for example, people, individual units, households, so houses, firms. Let's just make this into a firm as well. Firms and industries. So, for example, individual demand for cars, market demand for cars, a country's demand for cars. So, these things are within that country itself, right? And so, all of this comes under the microeconomics branch. The second branch is the macroeconomics branch. So, it's pretty simple. Anything that's within the country at this point is within micro, and anything which is about the country, which I'll explain right now, is about macro. So macroeconomics is a branch of economics that deals with aggregate demand, and aggregate demand is the demand for all goods and services. It does not differentiate between the goods and services, so it includes all goods and services in a given economy. And obviously the economy in this case is a country. So the, let's say if there is a country, we can just take Pakistan. So when we don't differentiate between different things, for example, an individual's demand can be different from another individual's demand. If this is a household, so a household's demand can be different from another household's demand, and so on. For example, this individual's demanding cars, so that's going to be part of microeconomics. If a household is demanding, let's say, wheat, then that'll be part of microeconomics. At the same time, if this firm is demanding something or the other, that's going to be part of microeconomics. Whereas, let's say if we take into account Pakistan as a country and this country as a whole, basically, so what's going to happen in this case is if we look at the demand for all goods and services, which is known as the aggregate demand. So, if we look at this type of demand, which does not differentiate between goods and services, all goods and services produced within the economy, the demand for those goods and services is known as the aggregate demand. And so basically, this is your macroeconomics. This is what macroeconomics consists of, and so that's how we differentiate between the two. This includes aggregate demand, which is the demand for all goods and services, and then microeconomics consists of demand by individuals, households, and firms. And these households, individuals, and firms can demand different goods and services, and those goods and services will have their own demand curves, as compared to one demand curve for every single good in the economy.